Robert Lee, what does a cyber attack on industrial infrastructure look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about critical infrastructure, the critical part of critical infrastructure is those industrial systems, those that generate power, the rail, the ports, et cetera. And we've seen throughout the last couple of years a variety of attacks and how they manifest. One of the first big public ones was a cyber attack on the electric system in Ukraine in 2015. And we had a sort of a power out scenario for hours across different regions of Ukraine. Had it again in 2016, and probably more worrisome, there was an attack in 2017 where an adversary tried to compromise safety systems at a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia where they actually tried to kill people. So it ranges from disrupting portions of our day-to-day life to a place you could actually hurt people by targeting those types of systems.
Obviously, you mentioned Ukraine there, and it is at the centre of news around the world at the moment. What did that cyber attack look like back then in 2015? And do you think that the Russians are doing the same again now?
Yeah, in 2015, the Russian government broke into 3 different power companies in Ukraine, and essentially they learned how to operate the system in the same way that our power operators would. There was nothing too novel about it. It was just bold. If an operator could turn on and off the lights at a substation, so could the adversary. And so it really showed what could be done in this world of physics and these industrial systems. And then in 2016, they learned how to make it more automatic. They learned how to be able to make it scalable. And so over time, we consistently see these adversaries not only get more bold, but become more sophisticated in how they approach this problem. And when you look at what's happening in Ukraine right now, we don't see massive power outages and things like that.
You've said recently that you would expect Russia to do more of these kind of attacks, particularly considering the sanctions that have been imposed on it by countries around the world, including Australia. Does that make us a target?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, just from judging off of history, right, not anything predicted, but just looking to the past, in 2014, when Russia ended up taking Crimea, the Western financial services organizations ended up sanctioning portions of the Russian economy. And as a result, Russia ended up carrying out cyber attacks against those Western financial institutions. So in the same way as we see not only sanctions now, but going after energy infrastructure, Nord Stream 2 and kind of the pipeline operations in Russia, you would absolutely expect to see the effect of cyber, or the potential for cyber as a tool to be leveraged against the Western world. And the Biden administration in the United States has very correctly come out and warned folks that if things continue to escalate, and maybe even just as a due course of the situation, we may expect to see various infrastructure attacks. And lastly, on the Australian side, the Australian government very rightfully has carried out sanctions and joining the rest of the Western world in doing that. But it does make you a target now, not necessarily scaring the public. We don't want to have folks freaking out too much. But for our infrastructure owners and operators, we don't want them to be aware that we are a target.
We obviously have some very big mining and energy companies here. While you've been in Australia, have you met with any of them? What's your advice to those kind of operators?
My advice to them is looking not only at the response, how would you respond to an attack, but also on getting visibility and insights out of these industrial systems and those networks. In other words, we want to be in a place that if our adversaries compromise those environments, we can detect them. You don't want to just try to keep them out. You want to be able to keep them out and detect them in case they get in.
Robert, just finally, last week the Australian government announced a $10 billion investment into cybersecurity over the next decade. Is that enough? What should it focus on?
Yeah, so when you look at the government around the world, governments around the world are tackling this problem. When you look at the Australian government, they're being extremely proactive on talking about the cybersecurity investments, but that nearly $10 billion investment is for the government to do more of the government security work. The public should not be confused by the fact that none of that money is going to the infrastructure owners and operators. And while it is really important that governments around the world increase their posture as well, we have to appreciate that that doesn't necessarily translate to the day-to-day operations of those companies. The government is not flying in doing security work day-to-day for those companies. So that amount of money that goes to the government does not go to the infrastructure owners and operators. It's a good investment, but it's only one part of the puzzle. And until we can make sure that the infrastructure companies get the resourcing they need to do the right things, we're still going to be a little bit mismatched.
Robert Lee, great to get you on the program. Thanks so much.
And thanks for having me.